are live here on Hot Tag Takes on HamiltonRadio.net, channel HR2. I am your host, John BRECKO. PJ decided to skip the show because apparently he has different priorities, but it's okay. We still love PJ. But Ruben, I gotta ask you, how you doing, man? Let's give a shout out to Ruben for being the producer of the show. I don't think I've ever said anything nice to Ruben while we've been on the air. This feels disgusting.
Okay. I never say anything nice about you anyway, so we're kind of even on that.
That's okay. That's fine. I enjoy messing with you while we're on the air. But yo, I gotta say, man, just to let everybody know, Ruben did a workout. Ruben was spotted not only by a gym but inside a gym. I had this man working out, doing cleans and presses, dumbbell snatches.
Yeah, I'm only doing it once a week.
One arm is clearly stronger than the other. I think you can speculate as far as reasons why go, which I won't get into here on the show. But anyways, that's Ruben's business. I see why your head is so shiny now.
This is not rated X commentary.
How you doing, man? How's everything?
Everything. Well, I injured my arm because I was lifting up some furniture from the 60s.
Okay. Why was it from the 60s? Why didn't we get this
Because we were renovating.
replaced?
I was clearing out an old house. I had a little job.
Okay.
And the furniture back then weighed like...
Just a ton?
Yeah, pretty much. And it was just not one piece. It was 10 pieces.
Oh, okay. And just all the pieces weighed a lot?
Oh, yeah. And the house was 3 floors.
And they just had all the heavy furniture on the top floor.
Pretty much.
Why do I feel like that's just 60s logic right there?
I know, right? I was like, why couldn't it be on the bottom floor?
I don't understand, man.
And I'm going to tell you, I had this one cabinet. It looked like it was very light, and I think that's where I injured my arm. Because we emptied it all out, all the papers, all the metal. And I was like, oh, I got this. This thing is this should be light as a feather. Nope.
Rip the shoulder out trying to get to the door.
Right to the door.
Extended himself too quickly.
Yeah.
All right,
so I think I sprained the arm. But, I think working out a little bit is lowering the
pain
a little bit. But on top of it,
getting used to it.
I'm getting used to it. But also on the workout sore, that goes away. But I think it's stretching out the pain a little bit on my forearm.
You'll be all right.
My arm was not in any type of rated X movement that he thought in his dirty mind.
No, I said nothing. You assumed.
I did assume.
But I'm very, very excited to do the show tonight, Ruben.
John, you actually do a great job.
Yeah, I try to.
You work out. Yeah, you actually do a really good job.
But anyways, guys, if you want to come by, come to Savage City Strength Saturdays at 7 p.m. Ruben's been there a couple times. We got a couple people looking to come this Saturday as well, and we've got somebody coming in for at least the next few weeks. So definitely make sure you guys check it out. I'll put you to work.
Well, what's the address, John?
The address is 216 US 206 in Hillsborough.
Okay.
So that's where you go at 7.
At 7 o'clock? Well, I know that, but
I'm used to talking about other people, so allow me to do that next. But anyways, tonight we have on a published author who's been in many books, including a specific one that we'll talk about today, which is The Wellness GPS, where she talks a little bit about her story. She herself is a child of sex trafficking, and today is the founder and chair of Voices Against Trafficking. And I'm honored to talk with her today about the book and her experience to help get the word out there about trafficking, how to stop it, mental health, and anything that could really just, in general, help another person. So, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for ANDI BUERGER! Woo!
Thank you, John. I appreciate that.
I gotta ask, you got the setup ready, you got the step and repeat, you got the headphones, you're ready to go. So I want to ask, how you doing? How's everything going on? And we did have a little bit of a talk. I asked if your husband asked for fries on the side when he proposed. But, I mean, in general, just how is everything?
Everything's going great. I have come to the end of this year a little too quickly, it seems. I can't believe how fast it has gone, but our organization, Voices Against Trafficking, is just putting out a lot of great public awareness, things like that. I'm having a great life, having a great time, so that's all good. Love that part.
I love it. Gotta have that 100%. But I do want to talk a little bit about Voices Against Trafficking first, and I'm going to start with a couple of the quotes directly from the website of Voices Against Trafficking. Then we'll talk a little bit about Andy's history fighting against it. So, Voices Against Trafficking brings together national and international partners dedicated to eradicating the business of profiting in human lives. We are individuals, corporations, survivors, nonprofits, law enforcement agencies, legislators, media outlets, and human rights advocates, and we will be heard. We are fighting to end human trafficking, a multi-billion-dollar industry that has no place in our world. At Voices Against Trafficking, we're the voice of the voiceless, and we aim for justice and specialized care for all victims while holding traffickers accountable. Together, we're committed to eradicating human bondage and sexual slavery. I don't think I have to explain, or I shouldn't have to explain, that that is a horrific thing to do to somebody. But what I'm glad about is that we have people like Andy that are out here fighting for people who are at risk. And before we go into a little bit more detail about Voices Against Trafficking, I do want to make sure that we talk about Beulah's Place, which you founded in 2008, providing temporary shelter to at-risk teens, rescuing over 300 of them, housing over 50, and assisting 8 of them through college. Thank you so much, of course, for all of your service. And I do want to ask, talk about a little bit about your experiences, if you feel comfortable,
Sure.
what made you start Beulah's Place, and how it led to the launch of Voices Against Trafficking.
Absolutely. Well, you said it very well. It's a horrific thing for anyone to have to be victimized by sexual predators, labor traffickers, anything where a person is coerced against their will. And what a lot of folks don't know, John, is that it happens in families generationally as well. So in my particular case, way back in the early 60s, I was trafficked by all immediate family members and some extended family members. Not for profit. I don't think they knew they could have made money back then, but perversity and greed are the 2 driving factors of trafficking.
I did not
So
know
I
that,
was,
by the way. I just want to point that out.
yeah, absolutely. Some people think that trafficking just showed up the last 40 years, but it's been going on since before the Greco-Roman era.
Oh,
There's
sure.
been a trade of humans for sex, for debt reduction, for labor, for countless years. So, but in my case, there wasn't any social services. There weren't things that could help. I was trafficked from 6 months old to 17 years old by both male and female family members.
Wow.
So by the time I got to age 5, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, all of that was so intense. And my birth mother basically said, I can take you out anytime I want. So I thought, you know what? The brutality was so painful and overwhelming. Nobody heard the screams. Nobody would even know to ask questions back then. I thought I would just take my own life at 5. So I went to the curb of my house and I thought, I'm just going to jump in front of the first car that comes by so I can just be dead, because I'd rather be dead than to go back into that house.
Yeah.
And so, my birth mother was a teacher, my birth father was a salesman, and I had a brother, but nobody knew because the image, everything on the outside looked good. And so you fast forward to age 17, that was the last time my birth mother tried to kill me, tried to choke me to death. And so it was a horrific childhood. And again, you're trapped because in a family system, even if you could break away, the court systems do not see that necessarily as a problem, and they send the kids back to abusive parents. As a minor, you don't have rights. So fast forward to my desire then, to want to help kids who were like me, but I didn't have a social support system, didn't have friends, didn't have other family members to go to. So I excelled in school. School was like my salvation. In my life, God saved me on that day. When I was 5 years old, I heard the voice that said, this is not the plan I had for you. For other people, it might be something else. But for me, that voice out of nowhere within my heart was enough to say, maybe I do have a purpose. Maybe there is something I can do to help other kids. And then I went to law school. I thought, maybe I can represent kids. But
I don't mean to interrupt, of
yeah,
course, but let
that's
me
okay.
ask if, because I'm actually curious about something. Were you one of those kids that, hung out around school, to try to like get away from, whatever the home situation, was that was going on? Obviously, you went through a lot, but were you one of those kids that, you know, hung out like maybe like around the school? Were you one of those kids that went over to a pizza place maybe with somebody? Because I feel like there's obviously not a lot of people that what you were going through, but other kids that, will hang out like around the school, go to a place with their friends to try to get away from whatever's going on at home. Were you one of those kids that would hang out around school? I'm just kind of
No,
curious.
I wasn't allowed to have friends or to go with friends without being controlled. Everything was a controlled environment.
Okay.
And so anybody that came to the house, we were well versed on how to act, what to say, what not to say, or the penalty would be tremendous. However, you are correct. In later years, kids do hang out maybe at one person's house. Maybe there's,
Yeah.
a home where all the kids go to more often than they are at their own home.
Yeah.
Remember the latchkey kids? You might not be old enough, but kids that just like you said, they go to a pizza place, hang out at a mall, an arcade, just to not have to go home.
Yeah.
So that does happen, and that's where a lot of the abductions and a lot of predators get their product, their human
Okay.
product from, because they're unattached kids at that point.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. I feel like you were in the middle of, talking about, going to law school. I did remember reading that you were going to law school, but I think I stopped you around that part because I had that question. So if you wanted
Oh
to
no,
start from,
that's okay. I was just kind of giving you the elevator speech,
of
like okay.
course, no, I want to hear your story, and I want to hear, how you got through some of your experiences. So I don't mind the elevator speech at all.
Okay, good. Well, law school was great, but I realized that it wasn't really the justice I was looking for. I thought I could go save other kids and have this, great, wonderful life, but it was kind of during the Menendez and the OJ Simpson trials, and it just seemed to be more about politicking and, who had the most money or the best lawyer, not so much about what was right or what was wrong.
Right.
So I finished law school and went back to business because I
Okay.
thought, if I am successful in business, I can save kids, I can help kids more. If I'm more stable, that was my goal. And so I did very well in business, and I was able to get a lot of experiences. I hadn't really dealt with my own issues. I had a great game face. I could go
Yeah.
anywhere, be anyone for whatever purpose it was, but no one really got too close to me. That was my self-protection mechanism, my coping mechanism.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So, of course, we are here to talk about the chapter in the book, The Wellness GPS, your chapter. And when we spoke about it over the phone the other day, you talked about how people, when they've gone through something mentally that might have traumatized them, whatever it is, you talked about, I guess the necessity to create a new normal, whether that's through better self care, better boundaries, etc. You also talked about how we're a nation of walking wounded and everybody has something that they're struggling with. I think anyone listening, regardless of what they're going through, can benefit from hearing this. So I want to ask, especially since you mentioned, through law school, getting your degree, going into business, you really hadn't dealt with your own issues. After the first 17 years of your life as a victim, what became your new normal when you had to help yourself? And also, if you can tell us, how did that new normal lead to you getting a law degree and eventually helping others the way you do now? I understand that you said you hadn't dealt with your own issues yet. So, as you know, picked business back up and, I guess slowly started to deal with your own issues, how did you do it during that process?
Well, that process for me, education was that measure of success at that time. And I didn't really, again, have very close relationships with anyone, definitely not with my birth family, I was
Yeah.
as far away as I could. But what I did was I started realizing I was mentally ahead, but emotionally very behind. So even dating relationships were very challenging because trying to figure out the truth behind someone's intentions was a very mixed bag for me. I hadn't really considered counseling because, again, most people at that time, oh, counseling, something's wrong with you or whatever.
Right.
But I wouldn't say that now. It takes a lot of courage to go to counseling, but it
Yeah.
actually took me after I graduated law school. I married my ex-husband, who, big shocker, turned out to be an abuser. And
Yeah.
so it wasn't a long marriage, but during that time, because of that, I did go to counseling and I started realizing that it's okay to have needs, it's okay to have wants. I just hadn't learned how to express them and then to enforce that boundary of I'm just as valuable and worthy,
Yeah.
as somebody else. And it's a long process depending on someone's trauma. If you've been in a very bad auto accident or lost somebody very dear to you, that's traumatic. And there's post traumatic stress from a lot of different things in life. But for victims and survivors who have been sexually violated, that is about the most intimate type of violation and devastation a human being can endure. And then there's usually physical violence and things. So for me, once I got through the divorce, I knew how I wanted to live my life, and I wanted to still help people, but I needed to create another path through corporate training and places where I could cultivate my skills a little better and then start generating income that eventually could be used to help
Yeah.
other kids like me.
Yeah. So, what was the new normal? What did the new normal look like for you when you were recovering from the divorce? Obviously, you had steps to kind of, you know, get the income that you needed to be able to help kids that were in your situation. But what did the new normal look like for you once you realized how you wanted to live? Because I feel like that could help somebody else as well, just
Mhm.
sharing that.
Absolutely. So the old normal was being terrified, was being having bad self-talk habits like I'm stupid, I must be something terrible for people to do this to me, especially when they're your parents or family members and
Yeah.
all of that. Therapy helped with that a lot. Once I got through that part of counseling, I decided that I would create the new normal where I got to say what I was willing to allow in my life, who I was willing to allow into my inner circle, and how I was going to secure my personal boundary for self care, for other things. If I dated someone, it was a very strategic process. So I started practicing healthier, what I would call healthier steps. Self nurturing, still a process in my life all these decades later, but I worked on it, tried to I was still successful. I was definitely A driven. I was type A, get it done, be the best, be the first, do everything
Right.
great. But then I had to start realizing that I was compensating because I was using that as my value, my measure stick for my
Yeah.
worth. So my new normal was saying, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to make up for what people don't know about me.
Right.
And it's okay to say you've been hurt. So I had to create that path where it was okay to be vulnerable.
I love how I'm talking about health with somebody whose last name is Burger. I just want to put that out there one more time. But yeah, no, I think those are things that I think a lot of people can benefit from, not just, trafficking victims who obviously, I want to make sure whose voices are heard. That's why we're doing this, but also people that are just suffering through mental health as a whole and people that are
Mhm.
going through, any kind of abuse, whether it's, physical, emotional, sexual, any kind. And I think it's important for, you know, a lot of people that are going through mental struggles to be able to, let themselves know that, like you said, they're not perfect. They don't always need to be, and they shouldn't feel the need to have to, you know, compensate, using what their possibly good at as, the value for themselves. I think what a lot of people should understand is, everybody has something that, makes them valuable, and their self-worth shouldn't be attached to that. And everybody should, just understand that, regardless of the things you're good at, you have value as a human being. And I think that's, a message that I want people to be able to take from this, just from talking to
Absolutely.
you.
Just by existing, you are important, you are valuable, you have worth. No one else can be you in this world. You're uniquely made, but we forget that with all this stuff. Even if someone had not had that trauma, there are a lot of people that still think, well, I have to get straight A's, or I have to
Right.
be the best in my business, or I have to be wildly wealthy or something to really have worth. And that's not true.
Yeah.
If you wake up and you get up and you show up, you're already successful. The rest is just up to you to make those choices. And that's part of new normal, making better choices. But a
Yep.
lot of people need a little help, a guidance, whether it's a guidance counselor, or it's therapy, or it's a priest or a pastor or whoever. Sometimes we just need other people, one, to listen, two, to say, I'm willing to walk this path with you, because it does take support. John, a lot of people just don't have that, which is why people that are trying to go from victim to survivor struggle even more. There's just not a whole lot of understanding for them, or compassion. Well, just do this or just do that, or go get a new car. It's not a midlife crisis. This is something that, when you've been traumatized, even a nation, when we went through COVID, we had a lot of trauma as a nation
Oh
with
yeah.
PTSD. So we all have it. It's to the extent is a little different for some people, but the trauma never goes away. There is no cure for PTSD, which is why creating a new normal, finding a path that you can live with, okay, and put the rest of what happened behind you. It happened. You can't take that away. You
Yeah.
can't erase it, but it doesn't have to define you the rest of your life. And that's the key in creating that new normal, redefining who you are and the way you want to live, and then going after it and not taking second best.
I love that. 100%. Thank you for saying that. So I do want everybody to know this isn't the only book that Andy is in. She's in other books other than the Wellness GPS as well. Definitely check out the Wellness GPS for sure, because a lot of great authors collaborated to make that book possible, and I just want to make that known. There are others as well. I would be happy if she were to let you know at some point in the interview some of the other books she's in, so that you guys can read all of what she talks about. She also does have her own book, which is called A Fragile Thread of Hope, A Survivor's Quest for Rescue, which talks about her story specifically, as well as the story of four other victims. So, to paint a picture of what the book is about for everybody, I'm going to read the book overview from Amazon, which I have right here. Andy Burger survived 17 years of sex trafficking by immediate and extended family members before that term even existed. In A Fragile Thread of Hope, Andy and writer Kay Farish recount her remarkable journey to healing and personal triumph, her fierce determination to rescue others like herself, and the desire to give all victims of sexual predators a genuine voice. The telling moves readers in a very powerful way. A Fragile Thread of Hope explores the epidemic of teen homelessness and sex trafficking pervasive throughout America, even if it's in smaller towns. The book combines Andy's own story with first-person accounts of four survivors rescued by Beulah's Place, a nonprofit created by Andy and Ed Burger in Central Oregon. Quote, these amazing and true stories from courageous young voices who have beaten the odds and gone on to incredible successes teach us that what we see is not always the reality. And you continue on by saying the vast majority of homeless youth are not runaways by choice. When it comes to abuse in particular, Berger asserts, someone knows, someone always knows. It's whether they have the compassion and courage to step up for what is right, what is necessary, to save that victim. The part about the overview that I want to personally focus on is where you talk about what we see, how it's not always reality. And I could actually use some clarification on this as well. What are some things that we might see that aren't always reality? What potentially maybe stops people from helping out? Because I think knowing and hearing you say it might be possible for somebody to help out in a situation where maybe they wouldn't have before. So, what are some things that, might stop somebody from helping out? Because I think most people would want to believe they would help out in that situation.
Absolutely, and it's not very black and white, John. There's a lot of gray, but here are a couple things for sure. So one is a myth that, well, it doesn't happen in my neighborhood. I know everything. I know everybody. Well, statistics will show you that every 40 seconds, just in the U.S., a child 18 years or under is abducted. That means they're taken or they're lured into something that looked safe and then became unsafe. And what I meant by things don't always look the way we think they do is I don't even know, 2 decades, people would say, oh, well, if they're on the street, they're a runaway by choice. They're rebellious. They don't want like mom and dad's rules, whatever it is. And yet with over 300 plus kids just in our region that my husband and I rescued over a 14-year period of time, we found that the majority, yes, you do have a few rebellious kids out there. Maybe that's 10%. But every single one of the kids that we took off the street and reintegrated into community had been sexually abused, had been violated, had been abused in other ways. They had been so terribly hurt. They ran to the street thinking it would be safer than where they were living or in the family unit, whatever that looked like was for them. So they were driven to go find a different way to live. And they weren't running away because they didn't like mom and dad's rules. They were running away because they didn't want to be hurt. And some of them were on their third or fourth suicide attempt because they didn't have any social circle or support to help them get out of those situations. So instead of just writing all the teenagers off, we worked very hard to help people understand if they're unsheltered, there's a reason. And yes, some of our kids shoplifted. They shoplifted food because after 3 or 4 days of not eating, they were willing to risk jail just to get something to eat.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure. No, 100%. Here's the thing that confuses me about it.
Okay.
I think there's been a lot of kids that have threatened to run away, when they were young at one point or another, and probably a lot of people don't really mention that, but I don't know of anybody that has actually followed through with that or didn't find a place to try to go after or didn't come back. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head that hasn't done any of those things. So I'm thinking about it, just through my perspective, and I can't even imagine, somebody, running away and trying to stay out of the house because they're a rebellious teenager. Like, I think, like, if you're not coming back and you're willing to stay unsheltered, I feel like, at least looking at it through my lens, there would be a reason for that. So
Right, and you'd be right. And again, like I said, there are kids that are rebellious that just want to do whatever the heck they want to do for whatever reason, and that's true. But right now, we're in a society where there's a free for all, so to speak, because trafficking has been allowed to exponentially rise to such numbers. We're talking about $160 billion industry globally. In the U.S., we're talking 40, 50 million on the light side, but into the billions because the predators, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the leadership that says, this is wrong. Because what I tell people, and it came from a great friend of mine, she's president of Voices Against Trafficking, the Honorable Blanquita Cullum. She said it's not about right versus left, it's about right versus wrong. And in my opinion, human trafficking should always be wrong. It's a crime against humanity. And we have more slavery now, John, than we've ever had the whole history of the U.S. It's just hidden, and the voices have been muffled, so we can't hear them crying out for freedom.
It should always be a priority, I think,
Mhm.
is what should be said. You know, because it's human lives. That should always be a priority. At least I think so.
Absolutely. And some people disagree. That's fine. I think that if a predator, we had one state, Arizona, they did a great thing a few years back. They made a law: if you are convicted of one count of human trafficking, you go away for life. No bells, no whistles, no early release, no parole. And some people think that's inhumane. And my position is, you can never give me back my childhood, my adolescence, my innocence. Nothing can do that. I had to choose to rebuild my life every single day of my life. And so does every victim who becomes a survivor. They don't get that option, right?
Yeah,
So, but what a great step forward to say, that's it, you're done.
I
Get them
love
off the
that.
street.
So no, I love that. I 100% agree with you, and I think if you're not going to give somebody else the choice, maybe you shouldn't have it. But talk to me a little bit more, about Beulah's Place. It opened in 2008. I do understand, that COVID did close it down. I think that's the shelter you were talking about when we
Yes.
were on the phone the other day. I do want to ask, obviously, it's if it's reopening, but talk to us a little bit more about, the history of Beulah's Place and just, in general, how it came to be. I know the income probably came from, the business courses and you obtaining it through, different means, but talk a little bit more about Beulah's Place if you could.
Sure, absolutely. In 2008, I was in line for the top corporate trainer position, a nice salary. And it's what I love to do. I love educating and teaching adults and stuff like that. But I had the fourth of what has become 10 traumatic brain injuries in October of 2008. This one was pretty severe. I lost a year of memory. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I didn't know how I was going to function. Obviously, couldn't figure out my checkbook, so I was not going to be able to do corporate work.
Oh boy.
But a friend of mine said, "Andy, what would you want to do if money didn't matter, if you could do whatever you wanted?" I said, "I would want to help kids that were like me." And she said, "Okay, let's do that. Let's just put up a website with yours and Ed's idea." And so we did. And in that particular fall season, we had gone to serve food to homeless families on Thanksgiving. And that particular Thanksgiving, John, we saw four young girls, barely 18, if that. They all had newborn babies. They were all sleeping in their cars. They had nowhere to go. One followed a bad boyfriend, got pregnant. The other three had different stories. And I just knew in my heart we had to do something in this area.
Yeah.
So my husband and I talked about, well, okay, what if we got a warehouse, rented it, and fed them? Okay, well, then what do you do after you feed them? Where do they go? Okay, well, let's see if we feed them and then maybe do a dormitory style type situation. They could stay there, short term, like a week. But then what happens after that week? So we came up with what worked very well, which is a safe house system. Obviously, the people involved would be vetted. So let's say you said, hey, I'll take in, a teen boy and house him for 3 to 5 months because we have a contract that they signed. We had a very structured system. And then by that time, they have a job. They have finished high school or on process of finishing high school if they hadn't already, and they're reintegrated back into community. So we did temporary housing, very short order, so that they would not get stuck in a rut. And
Yeah.
if they did not comply, then, we had a way to deal with that too. But it worked so well that we got a lot of national attention. We had a 92% success rate of these kids staying independent with very minimal assistance in communities. And as you mentioned, yes, the unfortunate thing is once Ed and I built that and we had a great system going, and people wanted to copy our program, COVID happened. And in Oregon, the leadership of the state felt that, saving kids or a day shelter was not a great idea.
God
So
forbid.
we had to close. And so, but out of one lemon comes more lemonade. So
Yeah.
as we processed the closing of it, we looked at the wins, and we actually now have 12 who have graduated university out of that
I
system.
love that.
Yeah, from homeless to
Yes.
university, changing their world, having their own babies and families and stuff. So we really were proud about that. And we actually adopted one of the girls we rescued 4 years ago as an adult. And so she's killing it. She's straight A's. And
Yes.
yeah, so,
I love it.
if you're out there and you're in your 60s, you can still be a parent.
If you really want to do that.
Yeah. But just saying. So Beulah's Place set us up to create then Voices Against Trafficking. I recovered mostly, from the brain injury, but I had other health issues, and so I needed to do less physical. And what happened was we created the network then, kind of like a hub of a wheel. So Voices Against Trafficking is the hub of the wheel, but every spoke is an individual like you or me or a company or another nonprofit. Everybody keeps their own identity, but collectively we're a much stronger voice.
Right.
And the more spokes we get, the further that wheel can go. So since we couldn't march on Washington during COVID, we set up a system of collecting names and hoping to get 1 million names in the next few years on that roster saying, we want change. We want to stop human trafficking.
Right.
We want to, get the predators on the other side of the bar where they don't profit, where they don't get to have the say, and we have less victims because we've done prevention, we've put out education, we've created public awareness, and we've shown people without having to get out of your comfort zone too much, here are things you can do right now today to be prepared to be part of the solution.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. So Voices of Trafficking came to be, from Beulah's Place and the success of it, basically
Yes.
because you wanted to take on, a less physical role with the injuries, and it was still a way to help get yours and other people's voices out there. I just want to make sure I have that straight.
Right. It was birthed out of the success of Beulah's Place since we could no longer have a tangible shelter.
Yeah.
And at that time, we saw a greater opportunity. If we prevent victims, prevent human trafficking, then we wouldn't have victims. But a lot of people, as I said, oh, it doesn't happen here. That's only in the movies or whatever. So we had to really work on educational curriculum, prevention, online international forums, and it just kind of blew up in 5 years. We have books, we have magazines, Voices of Courage. We're
Right.
going to have a CD fundraiser. We're going to have a TV show. So it just went hog wild.
It sounds it. So I do want to ask, when you founded the shelter in 2008, because obviously you were, thinking of ideas to try to keep these kids safe, left and right, coming with the warehouse, keeping them there for a week, asking what happens after this week, and, kind of, doing the dormitory system from there to try to keep them in a safe place till they were able to be a part of society. How common were shelters, even as far back as in 2008? Because I just, just to put it in perspective for everybody, that's only 16 years ago. It's not a long time.
Right. Actually, there were no shelters, and we got
Wow.
such pushback. We weren't even in a building. We were able to purchase a building. We were renovating it. It had been dilapidated. It had been an old school district building. And we weren't even in there, I think, a week before the neighbors started a petition to get us out, even though the city had.
That's wild. 16 years ago, this was such a big deal.
It was.
I was 13 at the time. I was in middle school.
Oh my goodness.
That was more than half my life ago, and this was only a problem back then. I'm showing my age and how young I am a little bit, but I just want to put that in perspective for everybody. 16 years ago. This is after 2000. This is in the new millennium. That's wild to me that this was such a big deal, only back then.
Oh, absolutely. And the common issue is nobody talked to us. Nobody asked us about what the program was. We had everything lined out, therapists and basically a day shelter so
Yeah.
that we could work with these kids and keep them safe long enough to get them through their process. And there was just this community. One lady in particular started this witch hunt against us. Oh, they have criminals and their juveniles are going to be running rampant in our neighborhood, and all of this stuff. I'm like, we're across from City Hall. Okay, so they're not going to be running rampant anywhere. The police station is down the block from our building. But this was the mentality, because people are fear-based, John, and I'm sure you've experienced that in your young life, but they don't get the information. They don't do diligence. They don't do the work to really understand, and they never met our kids. They never spoke to us. They just decided that they didn't want us.
Oh man, I can't believe that. 16 years ago this was such a big issue. So I do want to ask, did at least some of the people find out, what was actually going on, what you guys were actually trying to do, and did any of them at any point, step up or even just realize like, "Oh, I see what's going on here"?
We had one gentleman who was kind of a silent spokesperson, so to speak, and he did come and look at the renovations and why we were doing it, because we had already increased school attendance with the teens we got to work with. We had reduced suicide rates among the 18 years and under group, and we had young adults that were legal but were now getting the skills and the support to finish high school and GED or diploma, and even go on to college. I mean, these kids, if you would have seen some of the devastating places. We had one boy who was robbed and beaten in a public restroom. It was the only heated one in our area, and cashed his check from his work, had cash on him. And so these kids, they just didn't really have any place to go. And yet here's a community that is a very giving and loving community in general. But you take a few people who have this fantasy that all teenagers are reckless and rebellious, and that mindset kept us from being able to fulfill those dreams for other kids that needed it. And just as another example, our daughter now, legally, she came from a father who sexually abused her from the age of 5 to 12. The mother divorced him. He decided her boyfriends were more important than her daughter. By the time Allison came to us, she was on her 3rd suicide attempt. And so the mother only came home if she tried to take her life, and left her with frozen food in the freezer. That was it. So this is what a lot of the kids were dealing with, and how do they fight that? So Allison got invited to a party, right? Other kids that had been hurt. Guess what happened? They started smoking weed and stuff like that.
Right.
She never would have thought about that, but they're like, hey, you can get pain-free if you do this. And then along came a 30-year-old woman. She was 17 at the time, Allison. And she started talking her up, buying her presents, took her to lunch, things that a young girl would love to have with her mom if her mom was around, and not with a boyfriend. But then a few months later, they ended up in a motel, and basically the 30-year-old woman trafficked her and said, you tell anybody, you're the one going to jail.
Dude, that's fear mongering right there.
Yep.
That's exactly what that is.
Absolutely. So, these were just a couple small stories, but it happens everywhere. And sometimes, do you know the coach that wants to have a pizza party for the girls' basketball team, and is he allowing parents to come? And I'm not saying all coaches are bad. Are the teachers vetted? Who do you really know in your neighborhood? And if let's say you have a sister, and she's starting to socialize, 13, 14, 15 years old, and then wants to go, not maybe for a sleepover, but an overnight party of some kind. Well, do you know if that person has a brother or a sister in that same house while the girls are going to be there? So it's just due diligence, John, and we have lost that desire to protect our kids.
As somebody who's a swim instructor and works with kids every day, I think that's a shame. I really do. And, I meet so many good parents. Like, I was talking to you a little bit about, the last 3-year-old that I have during the day. I'm not obviously going to reveal anybody's identity, but he's got two of the most, loving parents I can imagine. And it's just a shame to me after, working with kids for, the years that I have, that you wouldn't want to keep your kids safe. Like I can't understand.
Absolutely.
They should be first priority.
Mhm. If you're going to have children, they need to be a priority. And like I told people, they said, "Why didn't you just run away?" Well, where would I run to? I had no family, no money, no place to go,
Yeah.
especially in those days. And it's very difficult to leave a familial situation where there's abuse. But again, it's all about between an adult and a child. If you're in charge of a child, daycare worker, teacher, parent, foster parent, whatever, you have absolute responsibility for that child's welfare, to protect them, to make sure no one else hurts them, to not let your frustrations or your bad day, be turned on them. We
Yeah.
lose 5 kids every day on average just to child abuse in the US, and 80% of those are under the age of 5.
That's crazy. But
It is.
I,
But we
I
can do better. We're better
yeah,
people than that, John.
I would like to think so. Yeah, 100%. I do want to ask. You did mention on the phone with me that the shelter you ran was closed due to COVID. Again,
Yes.
Beulah's Place. I did want to ask if there was any plans to try to reopen it. I know there's different shelters now, at least these days, but I did want to ask if you guys had any plans to reopen Beulah's Place, or even if you had already, just to talk about it if you could a little bit. Ruben, are we still there?
And we're happy to share that.
Okay.
But again,
Oh,
we did not have the dollars to hire staff. We were all volunteers for that whole time, and we chose to do that. And that's just how it was. But we're grateful for what we did. Would I like to see it happen again? Absolutely, because I think it is still very much needed. We are getting more people publicly talking about it, but the community, your community, my community, has to say, you know what? We have to stop being afraid of teenagers actually getting educated, actually being, reintegrated into community, because something that wasn't their fault happened to them. And
right.
then again, like you mentioned before, mental health. How do we help them get through the trauma?
Yeah. Like what works best for them to try to, help them, get through whatever's bothering them.
Mhm.
But, I'm glad you guys are still planning to help. I'm glad you guys have been fighting this fight for everybody as long as you have. And I appreciate the fact that when there was, nobody else looking out for a lot of these kids, you guys were there for them. And I just want to say, for everything that you guys have done and continue to do with Beulah's Place in the past, Voices Against Trafficking now, thank you guys so much for being somebody that's looking out for a lot of these kids, a lot of whom are unable to really be able to look after themselves. From me to you guys, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you, by the way, to Cindy Neen for help setting this up, by the way. I really, really appreciate it. And once again, thank you for sharing your story, as well as, this message from you guys. Thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been an honor, and I appreciate you being part of the solution by talking about the message. And for anyone who wants to do something right now, go to voicesagainsttrafficking.com and download our hotlines and helplines. This way, if you see something, you can confidently call a number without being exposed, and you can report it.
All right. Once again, everybody, this was Andy Burger right here on HamiltonRadio.net, channel HR2. Make sure you guys like, comment, share, and subscribe. We are looking to get to 5,000 subscribers before the end of the year. We have a little less than 400 to go. Make sure you guys, once again, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Definitely donate to Voices Against Trafficking as well. Andy Burger here on Hamilton Radio with us tonight. Come see us next week, And thank you guys so much for tuning into this show tonight. Thank you.